So I want them to hear the real story of some of the properties that and I want you to tell them like the grindy story, because you go after properties that are really, let's just say, not an area you want to hang out in.
So my upbringing was were in areas similar to that. I grew up in Brazil. I moved to Brazil very young in an age, and we lived in like the outskirts of Brasilia. It was the hood. And so coming over here and, getting into real estate, I started in close proximity to where I live. It's just easier, right? And I live in Miami. And I just noticed that it didn't cash flow the way I wanted it to. I didn't quite have the opportunities that I wanted, so I started looking outside. And a broker that I was friends with introduced me to Jacksonville, to the low-income market in Jacksonville. And I went up there, initially my intention was to do some flips. And I think that was right around the time I read Robert Kiyosaki and took him probably more literally than most people did. And I started focusing more on building passive income. That was more interesting to me than making a quick buck flipping over and over again, right? Wanted to build something where I didn't have to continuously be, working nonstop on that same project in order to bring in cash flow. And I noticed that those returns were way higher. And as I got more into it, I noticed that I had the personality traits and just the characteristics to do well in that kind of market, because as you said, a lot of people don't feel comfortable going in those neighborhoods. To me, it just felt like home. That's where. So
you'd go into a place, and can we give an example of one of the more difficult properties you've done that maybe is in a tough location?
Yeah, so a lot of the first properties I started with were all single-family homes, and similar to what Ben Mala was describing yesterday, just turning shit into gold. Either it's a boarded up property, or sometimes there's some tenant actually living in there, but the conditions of the property are just not acceptable, and you're actually going in there and bringing value, right? We're not going to make this sound like we're going in it's not a humanitarian mission, right? We are there to make a profit, but we're also doing something good at the same time. Even though sometimes you do have to crack some eggs to make an omelet, sometimes there's a tenant in there with a difficult situation, and just the living conditions are not acceptable, and you have to get them out of there, and that can be a touchy subject. But for anything where, if you just want normal, easy turnkey properties, those returns are not going to be there, obviously. In these situations, it's going to require some level of expertise or just some hassle that a lot of people don't want to deal with.
Go through.
Yeah, right. And I'm willing to go through those.
Well, what's an example of like the lowest cost property you ever bought?
$37,000.
So you bought a $37,000 property. Did you pay cash or did you get a loan?
In those cases, I'll just do cash.
So you paid $37,000 for the property.
Yeah.
Talked about what you did with the property.
$20,000. Well, in the very beginning, I kind of got my ass kicked a little bit trying to figure out how to do it. It wasn't down to a science.
Right.
So, in the beginning, I just tried to do all the work myself, and, I was swinging hammers and laying tile and doing things that I'm not qualified to do, and trying to cut corners and not do permits and whatnot, because nobody's really checking in those areas either. And then kind of figured out that that's not the best way to go, because sometimes if you're holding the property, anything that you don't do perfect is going to come to bite you in the ass. You're not flipping the property. It's not somebody else who has to deal with it. So, now I'd rather spend a little more time, go through the process of getting everything permitted and supervised to not have to deal with that issue after the fact. And, we were looking at $30,000.
What happened to the $37,000 property?
It's still there. Still have it.
You still have it?
Yeah.
Does it make you money?
It does, yeah. Cash flows at about.
What do you make on that property?
I would say I still get a rate of about high teens, between 15-20%.
You bought it for $37,000. How much did you put into it?
Well, after that one specifically, since I had to go back and forth a few times and I was still learning everything, we probably put as much into the house as we purchased it for. So, we're probably 60, 70 in, and, probably make about $1,100 a month right now on that one single family home.
So you make $1,100 a month on a single family home
Yeah.
that you have, let's just round it up and say you have 70 plus thousand in it, right?
Sure.
So that's real money
Yeah.
on a percentage basis.
Yeah.
That's probably north of 20% IRR, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's big money. I mean, would you put 70,000 into something that was going to pay you permanent cash flow and the rents were going to increase each year?
100%.
So I love those kind of things.
Yeah.
And the funny part about those, in my experience, is the ones that I don't have to manage the most. They're just like, oh, it's 1,100. We equate 1,100 to ourselves and say, oh, you know, that's 1,100 bucks, right? But it doesn't feel like a lot of money, but a bunch of those added up over time, where it's passive. And when you started off with that, what was the rents when you started versus today?
So normally I would go in and grab a property with a tenant in there paying 600, 500, and a lot of the times I would get these from people that just didn't want to deal with them. So even though the potential for that cap rate is there, a lot of people don't achieve it because they're not willing to go in there and actually do the work necessary to keep that cash flow, that property cash flowing at its max.
Right.
You know, and that, I think that brings up the question too of whether you want to Section 8 these or whether you just want to have people pay out of pocket.
Well, that brings up an important point. In your experience, how's Section 8 been for you?
So it's been okay. I'll do a mix. Generally, at the scale that I do, which is not a huge volume.
Can you actually tell everybody what Section 8 is, so that just in case people don't know what that is?
Yeah, okay. Well, Section 8 is the Housing and Urban Development. They basically give people vouchers to pay for their rent. So you can accept, you know, I can either choose to accept that voucher or I can charge the tenant directly out of their pocket. And I'll do a mixture of both. Sometimes I'll accept the voucher from the housing authority, and that's guaranteed income. When you do that, you don't need to worry about whether the tenant's going to be able to pay their rent at the end of the month because you know you're getting a check. There's a security that you get. The trade-off with that can be that sometimes you're not maximizing the rent.
Because they're not giving you the guarantee on maybe what the full retail market is.
Right, and they do a really fair job. I feel like it's never below market, but you know, there is the option to get the voucher and have the tenant supplement that with the remainder of the income. I remember when I got into it, I remember somebody saying that you couldn't do that it was like illegal to bring in more money, but you can do that. And I had that situation in the past where the housing authority brings in X, they bring in Y to complete Z. So there is that potential to get your guaranteed income, to also have the supplemental income from the tenant and still maximize it. But I feel like if you're working with a big enough development, let's say you have a 10-unit multifamily, sometimes you're at the point where there's enough scale where it's just easier to market it directly to HUD and have them just pass it on to their tenants. So you don't have like a mixed building where half of them are paying out of their pocket and they're paying more, and then the other half are paying less because they're only paying the voucher amount. At that point, I feel like if you have a big enough multifamily, you make it just one use or the other. Because a lot of these are single family homes, I don't have one tenant paying X and the other one paying Y, and that gets into a weird situation.
Dom is willing to put in the time and energy to do this. And as I said earlier in this conversation, I've done a lot of these deals. I did one in Arizona, which I had a person approach me and say, hey, my parents are living there and the doctor wants to sell it. My parents can't afford to move. Would you buy this property? And I bought the property for $76,000. And I told them, just treat it as your own. And they paid me, ironically, about $1,100 a month for about 10 years till they passed away. My payment was $476 a month. My association was $70. And I didn't have to do anything on the property. When I sold the property, I sold it for more than $120,000, which I regret doing. Every single time I've sold any single family home, any condo, I regretted selling the property. I talked earlier about my mom earlier, and my mom saying, hey, you know, I really think at $289 the property's a good deal. And I'm like, Mom, who's gonna pay $289? And you know, 10, 15 years later, they're paying $700,000, $800,000.
Yeah,
we have a shortage of housing in this country that people are not dealing with, and less housings are going to come on the market because rates have been locked in at those lower prices. So you heard Ben Mullah last night say there's a storm coming, and I think you're ready for the storm.